Thank you very much for taking the time today to view our video. Before we begin, we'd like to take a moment to introduce ourselves. There are many aspects to 9.Connects, but it boils down to the fact that we're a PCB Centric organization. We believe and focus on the PCB due to the fact that it is truly the center point of all electronic design. That's where our expertise lies. We provide services not only in the PCB layout, but in design consulting as well. And during the technical portion of this webinar, you will see this expertise in motion. We are now the exclusive North American instructors for Altium Designer. We host 100 trainings throughout the year across North America, and we are excited to bring these trainings closer to you. In addition to our services, we are also a value-added reseller for a number of PCB-related software companies. And just to note, each company has been presented in past webinars. So if you're interested in them, please contact us or check out our website. And by the way, we provide one-on-one coaching for these tools as well. For more information on our services and past webinars, please contact us. Our information is listed in the description below. Thank you for giving us a moment of your time, and please enjoy the presentation.
Thank you very much for joining us for part 2 of this webinar series on libraries. So today I'm going to give you a tour of the libraries. Do not worry, I'm not going to go through PowerPoints today. I just want to put this up as basically an introduction, and I just wanted to set the agenda for you today because we have a lot to talk about. So this is what I'm going to be covering here. Let me just click on this so it'll pick it up. So we're going to go through schematic libraries very quickly, just the fundamentals of laying them out. As a symbol-centric library, as we mentioned last week, this is the type of library that most people use. Been around the industry for a long time. We're going to touch on integrated libraries. I'm going to go into information about database libraries. I'm also going to demonstrate very briefly our new product, the 9-box, which we've deemed to call 9-box Connects, our database library. And I'm also going to talk about the schematic libraries being used as a template for a database library. I'm briefly going to comment on subversion database libraries. I am going to show an example of a database, a DB link file, and then lastly I'm going to top it off with the component library, that .cmp lib, and how it relates to the vault. All right. So I'm going to basically escape out of this here and bring up my screen. I'll make it full screen so you can see it over here. So let's start off with the schematic-based library. So here's an example of one that I've got over here, and actually I created 2 of them. One of them I created was basically just engineering data only, and the other one was one that I created where I also had purchasing data in it as well. So let me bring up this one because it's kind of a very complete example of the symbol library in use. So you got all your components over here. Each and every single one of them is listed. If you got different resistors, each one's listed separately here. You have all your model links over here, your footprints, your signal integrity, your SPICE stuff can be added in here, even legacy 3D stuff. I don't recommend you use it. The new method that they put in Altium Designer 6.8 is far superior to it. But if you actually have legacy designs, you can even link old PCB stuff to it as well. You've got basically your supplier information over here. And where did this come from? So one thing I want to mention here, even though it's not necessarily a part of the library, but it's built throughout Altium, is this thing called the supplier search. And it's a very powerful panel. And this library, the database libraries, the subversion database libraries, even the designs themselves, even the vault, all use this. Okay, so that's how powerful it is. And when you're doing this in the library, it's just a matter of finding a part. You know, if I put in something over here, and it remembers the older ones that I put in here before, it goes out into the internet based on the different suppliers that Altium can link up to, and it finds you this information. And you just simply right-click on it, and you can add that in. And that's exactly what I did over here. All right. Now we talked about intelligent data, and yes, you can go into each and every single one of these. You're probably familiar with this, and you can set up all the data that you want here. And if you add the supplier stuff here, Altium will add those parameters in there as well. So that's a tremendous help, so you don't have to do all that typing in on your own accord. Now, one of the more powerful features of the symbol library is also this thing called the Tools Parameter Manager. I use it all the time because it allows you to get into there and see everything all at once rather than have to click in each and every single one of these components. And one of the things I do personally is I never need to really look at this other stuff. I think it just adds a clutter to the screen. But I do want to see my system parameters. So usually when this comes up, they'll have these things checked and they'll have this one checked too. I turn all this off because I just want to see the parts. And when I press OK, that's what I get over here. Right? And this allows me to do edits as I see fit. So if I did get supplier information, I pushed it in over there, and I do this for all the parts, then I can see what I've accumulated as a result of that. All right. Now, for example, if I don't want any of this stuff, let's say I don't want this one over here, I can click on this here, and I can go onto this one over here, hit the Shift key, and I can tell Altium, hey, go ahead and remove this. And Altium will basically remove that, and then it will say accept the changes, and it will push that stuff in automatically. So you don't have to make changes to each and every single one of those. All right, and that's what I've basically told it to do right now. So while it is doing that, one of the things I wanted to mention is that the supplier information is good and it's bad, and I definitely recommend that you use this to get information in there. But once you've got that information in there, you may want to be careful as to what you want to keep, because a lot of that data is extraneous, and as you saw earlier with this over here, look at all the additional parameters that it creates, and it makes a lot of columns, and it becomes more and more difficult to maintain that. And so it's very important to basically kind of weed those things out, keep those things that you think are important. As I mentioned last week, we talked a lot about intelligent data, and one of the things I'm not a big fan of keeping in the libraries is very dynamic data like pricing and availability, because that's great for now, but 3 or 4 weeks from now, that's going to be stale, and you're going to have to go back in there and you're going to have to update it. Altium does not update that kind of stuff on its own accord. So that's why it's really important that when you do this stuff and you pull in the supplier information and you do these things into the parameter manager, that you weed this out and that you trim it up so that you only keep those things that you think are pertinent. Now, not every single one of these columns is going to be filled up, right? Or it may have different data. So here's the temperature coefficient. If you're dealing with capacitors, they have their own nomenclature for that. If you're doing resistors, they use parts per million degrees centigrade. All right, or there may not be a tolerance associated with it because these might be IC parts as opposed to capacitors or resistors. Some of the stuff you may want to keep, others you may not want to fill in, or you may not find it pertinent. It's up to you. But the key thing that I'd recommend that when you're doing these type of libraries, and this is true across all libraries, is you want to keep the static data that's going to be true tomorrow, true next week, and true 10 years from now. Okay? So that's the key thing about this. And this is the type of libraries I mentioned earlier. People have used this one for years. It's one of the first types of libraries that have been out there since the beginning of the whole EDA industry, what, 20, 30 years ago. All right. The only other thing I'd mention about this over here is that when you're doing these things, you want to think long and hard about the components and the descriptions. Now, last week I went into a lot of detail about that, but when I took this library, I took the DT05 project from Altium, and I said, okay, I'm going to extract out these parts. And when I did it, I had to clean these up, and I spent a lot of time doing it. But the reason I want to do that was to emphasize the fact that once I clean them up, this is very organized, and I can read this very quickly, and I can see what these components are doing. And that's why it's really important to come up with your own nomenclature for the description. This particular nomenclature I used, for example, is the one I used at the last company, and we did that because they were limited to 32 characters, so we didn't want to waste on white space. They also had a requirement that they said, hey, we want to be able to parse this data. So we put in commas over here without spaces to make sure that if they wanted to parse it in their larger databases into other columns, they would be able to do so very easily. So this is my format, or the format I'm familiar with. Do you have to use it? No. As long as something works for you and you're consistent with it, that it's complete, as I mentioned last week, and it is searchable, as I mentioned last week. Same thing even with the name over here. One other thing I'll mention really quick here is the comment. And the comment's actually a really important thing, and you do want to have this conversation with your colleagues about it, because this is the only parameter that gets pushed over to the PCB side. I don't know if you knew that or not. All these other parameters stay on the schematic side. This is the only one that gets pushed over. My personal recommendation, take the description you got here and stick it in the comment one as well, because once it gets pushed over to the PCB side and you got nothing more than just a footprint, then you can double-click into the footprint property and say, oh, this particular footprint is associated with this type of component, and therefore maybe I want to put it in a special location, or maybe I got to deal with a heating issue, thermal issues, and so on and so forth. So I'm a big fan of taking the description here and copying it in here. Now, I didn't do it for this particular example, but that's just a recommendation that I'm going to make for you over here. All right, let's see where we can go with this. There is. All right, I think we're going to kind of leave this where it's at. I think most people understand this type of library, and if there's a couple of other things that that come up over time, I'll make mention of it. Oh, in fact, I just saw it right here, right now. This, to me, is not a great example of a footprint naming convention. In fact, one of the attendees from last week, Roger, I got your email. Thank you so much for replying to it. And he brought up a really good point. And the point that he brought up is that there is nomenclature that you can use over here to make sure that your footprints are very readable as well. Because in this case here, yeah, I've got this set up. But if I got to go over to my footprint library, right, and I click on Add Footprint, and I go over here to look for it, and it should find it here pretty quick. I want to make sure I can read these things very easily. It's one thing to have a picture, which is certainly good, but what does this associate itself to? It actually took me over 30 minutes to figure out that this mod edge here was a custom part that Altium used for its DTO5 project, because I couldn't find it anywhere when I was trying to look in the supplier searches. So it's important that you come up with a good naming convention. But more importantly, someone's already done that for you, and that's the IPC. And interesting enough, it's actually free, which is not very usual for IPC, God love them. But the fact of the matter is that if you go onto the internet, you could find this. And by the way, if you ask for the whole tour of this library, everything I'm going to show you today, I've zipped up. If you want to see it, want to play with it, it's available. Talk to one of your sales reps. We'll put the names up again at the end. But if you just go on to your internet, you can get the LAN patterns. Just say, I want surface mount LAN patterns, and say IPC, and you can get this over here. You can follow this convention so that all your parts are uniform. And again, this is true whether you're using a schematic library or a DB library or any other type of library I'm going to show you today. It's really good to have a good naming convention for your descriptions, for your component names, in this case your symbols, and your footprints as well. So just wanted to make mention of that before we moved on. The next thing I'm going to show you over here is I'm going to go over here to the integrated library. Okay, so we just talked about the schematic library. I want to talk a few minutes about the integrated library because Altium doesn't make it very obvious how to use them, and it's actually kind of a neat library type. And really what the integrated library is it's nothing more. If I go over here to File, New, Library, you won't see it. It's actually a project, or it starts off as a project. So when I click in this over here, I bring it in. Now why is that? Because the integrated library is a single library file in a binary format. So the way Altium handled it is they said, we'll turn this into a project. And in this case, you can see my example over here where I created one earlier on. I created this project called DTO5.lib package, and I added in my PCB, and I added in my schematic stuff. And in order for me to create the intlib, I right-click on it, and I compile it. Now, if I press on this over here, Altium's going to whirl a little bit over here, and that's it. It's not going to really tell you anything. Now, granted, it added itself to the library, or one of my libraries here. I believe it's there. And there it is now. And now it's usable, but where did it put it? So let me kind of show you kind of the back. I'm going to bring up the Windows Explorer here so you can take a look at this. Again, these are all the files I've zipped up. If you're interested in it, we'll send them to you so you can play with it. Let me go over here so you can see it. So these are the files over here that you see right over here. And since this is a product or a compilation, it's actually treated as a project output. We go over here, and here's the integrated library. Now, the integrated library is kind of unique in the sense that it's really more of an end product library. It's something you usually give to somebody, and then if there's updates, you don't really edit that one. You give them another one, and it supersedes the last one. So a lot of designers, for example, they'll keep their master libraries somewhere separate from the public domain, and then what they'll do is if they just got a schematic library and a PCB footprint library, they'll do the compilation on it, and they'll create this .intlib and issue that thing out to the public domain where your colleagues will use it. The other situations, you can go under the .dblib, which I'll talk about in a minute, and let's say you have a central library on your machine and you're going to take your laptop off and you're not going to have access to those libraries. There's actually a function that will take the database library information and convert it into an integrated library so you can take it onto your machine. But again, those files can go stale over time, and it's a lot easier to work with the source files than it is to work with the end product. It's not to say you can't do that, but if I try to open this over here, Altium has to unravel it, basically convert it from binary back to ASCII, and it's just a lot easier to work with your source files and then compile it than to constantly take this one, unravel it, because it creates another copy of it. And then if you save it, it would actually create another directory, and you start kind of digging a hole here pretty quick every time you take the last intlib and try to edit it there. So that's what it's for. I think it's a pretty useful little feature, but again, I look at more as an end product library more than a development type of thing. So just for your knowledge as to the integrated library. All right, let me move on over to the database library. And I'm going to go a little bit slower on this because a lot of people are curious about it. And I'm bringing up my access right now so you can see it. And there's a shift of the mindset that you have to kind of understand where you're doing it. And I also wanted to bring this up too so you can kind of compare and contrast over here. Let me bring this back over here. So this database library that I created is based off of one of the libraries that I just showed you here earlier. So what this is over here is this in a database format. Okay? And my recommendation is if you're ever going to start doing that, then if you already have a schematic library in place, go to the parameter manager, copy everything out, put it in Excel, okay, and then manipulate things in Excel and then bring it to Access. Because the database folks make it very clear that this is not a spreadsheet, okay, and they don't give you all of the feature capabilities that Excel has for various manipulations and copy and paste and stuff like that. So that's why I say if you're starting something from scratch, definitely start it in Excel first, then bring it up over here, and just makes your life a lot easier. Now, let's take a look at this because we've got to look at this from a different perspective than the symbol-centric library. Each one of these columns over here is a parameter. As I mentioned, that's intelligent data. Intelligent data is a parameter. Parameter is nothing more than a name and a value. In this case, the column name is the name, okay? And each one of these cells is the value. The row here is the component, okay? And so every time we add another row, we add another component in there. There's 5 basic rows or columns that we have to have in order for this to even work. You got to have a unique number, usually a company part number. You got to have a specific library path, or in this case, it really should be called symbol path, but Altium's kind of, for some reason, call it a library path. It's a path. You have a reference, basically, what's the name of this thing, and the exact same thing for the footprint here as well. Now, some people will argue saying you don't need to have this library path or this footprint path in your database or switches that you can turn on in what's called the .db lib file, and I'll talk about that in a moment. I don't like doing that because in my support days, when people turn those things on, Altium would find whatever local library was close to this database, and many times people would build a library, but they would have another library hanging around. But if you check box that saying, hey, use the libraries that are kind of hanging around the database, it would always find some other library, and as a result, we'd get these calls, and we'd have to go fish through all of their stuff to try to figure out where the first instance of their symbol was coming from so that they could correct it. By me putting in this particular library path, I make it dead-on specific. In this schematic library, I want this part, end of story. Don't go looking at anything else. So that's why I'm a big fan of being very specific about calling out the library name that needs to be used for both the footprint and the symbol. Now, those 5 things I mentioned, this company part number or some unique ID, and these 4 columns will get you onto a schematic and into a PCB, but there's no intelligent data. So what's the intelligent data? Things like manufacturer's name, manufacturer's part number, descriptions, all right? Let's take it over here furthermore. Data sheet information, packaging information, if that's the kind of stuff that you want to gather for this, all right? That's important because when this is being shown over here in the libraries panel for part placement, that allows you to make intelligent decisions to put your design, your component down, create your design, and then get to a bill of material that also has this information as well. So it's a matter of adding in this intelligent information. Now, with that being said, I want to spend a few moments with this area here with the symbol reference, because you'll notice that these change compared to what I've got over here, because we have to treat the symbol library as nothing more than a graphic. And for us, it's kind of hard because in the past, we put everything into this. That's why I call it symbol-centric. We put the models into this. We put the intelligent data into this. All that gets stripped out and just now becomes nothing more than a graphical representation for the symbol. Okay? It's the exact same thing we do for the footprint. In fact, in the footprint library, if you open it up, there are no parameters. Okay? And what we have to realize is that we're treating the resistor the same way we're going to treat the footprint in the database library. And let me kind of go into a little more detail about that here. So let me bring up my projects, and let me bring this particular file up, because this is the one that my database is referring to. And so you'll notice that this has been stripped out. So if I had 100 resistors in here, I only got one now, because I don't need to show 99 other resistors. I just need one graphical representation. If I double-click into this, you'll notice all the parameters are gone, the model has disappeared. I don't even need anything more than just a symbol reference. That's the most important thing, so I can tell Altium, hey, in this library, use this symbol reference. Okay? I also have this thing called value and price. And wait a minute, I thought you stripped out all the values. Well, I did. The reason I left this in is just kind of a little note for you guys who are already doing this stuff, is I did this for formatting purposes. So in Altium, what I can do is I turn this on, but I also said make it visible. So when I go to my libraries and I place it, the value will be superseded with the one that's already in the database, but Altium will make it visible upon placement. Okay? And in fact, all this stuff is going to get superseded by what's in the database. Whatever was in my description, that's going to get superseded. If I have a comment, it's going to get superseded. The only thing that's really not going to get superseded is the designator, because the designator is handled in this library, and the symbol reference is going to remain the same. It may remain the same, or actually they may even put database library in here. But regardless, the database just takes this as fine. I'll throw this in, and I'm going to put my data on top of this. Okay, and that's the key thing to realize here. I use things like resistor_general because there could be another type of resistor. You know, maybe there's a pot that I'm going to bring in, or network resistor, or one that's got a temperature coefficient, or you know, a variable resistor, and they'll have a different representation. So I try to make sure that I keep the component name underscore and then some type of description that allows me to compare or to determine which one I want to use. A better example of that is the polarized and non-polarized capacitors. You can see those right over here. Okay, ICs have got to be the easiest thing there because you really don't change the ICs. The description should remain the same because ultimately you need to find it here anyways. And the other thing is that you know, you're not having to delete these things or sift through them because they're all unique. And unlike a capacitor, if you got 100 of them, you toss out 99 of them and you only keep one representation of it. So that's kind of one thing that you get from that. But notice there are no footprint models at this point. It's all been stripped out. So that's the database library. But I want to kind of now segue into our product here. This here, just to kind of let you know, when I did this, even though I had kind of a little bit of a head start using an existing library here, this took me well over 4 hours, and that may surprise you. It took me that long because I had to basically format a lot of things, and granted some of it got done over here earlier on, but I had to make sure that these things were lined up. I had to bring in the supplier data here. There were certain things I wanted to keep, certain things I didn't want to keep. A lot of times I had to go back over here and make modifications to clean this up so this would work out correctly. So there was that. It sounds kind of like it's very administrative, and at times that's what it felt like. And I'd make a mistake, and I'd go back. I didn't want to go this way, I went that way with it. So easily 4 hours was put into it. The company I worked for 2 years ago, when I helped them out, I had 15 guys that I was helping out, and I was primarily helped with what they call configuration management. But the vast majority of time that I put into it was into the libraries, and I helped them create a database library. And when I was thinking back to it, we put well over 6 months of time into the database library. So the larger the company it is, you're going to have to deal with all the process issues. You're going to have to deal with everybody's input. You're going to have to deal with the purchasing group, whether you like them or not. And you have to work with whatever is already in place, right? There are monoliths in those companies that you just can't move. They're there. You got to work around them, or you got to work through them. Okay. The reason I bring that up is that the box that we created here at 9.connects, the same thing was going on with the developer who put this together. So our developer who put this together basically was doing PCB design for a lot of other companies. And every time he went to those companies, he found that those companies had their libraries were in tatters. And he would go in there and, hey, if you're going to get a PCB done, you got to have a good library. So he'd go in there and he'd be building models. So that was a part of his job to try to get through the PCB design. Well, he collected those things, and over time he organized those things. And it took him well over 3 years to put this together, but finally he put something together that was very impressive, and we felt that this is something that our customers might be interested in. And so what we've called it is the 9-Box Connects. And what it is it's our database that we are making available for sale. And let me give you kind of a little bit of a tour of it here. So let me bring up my web thing. It is a box, all right? In fact, this is the box that I have on my machine. We've built, on my desk. This is where this copy of it is being tested out. And we had to use a box because it's a web server interface, all right? And that's kind of a powerful thing, so that if you you don't have to do everything through the database itself. You can actually do it through the web interface, and this is the one that got created for that. So by doing this, everybody can see this. You don't have to have the database tools on your machine. You don't even have to have Altium open to see what you've got in here. And so these are all the things that you can do. These various buttons have been added in because we have actually sold this to a couple of customers already who are using this, and through their feedback, we've been adding in capabilities here that help them along in trying to get their processes going. But it's very easy to add a part in. You click on this. It gives you the fields that are necessary, so you're not trying to do something like this where you're trying to go in here and trying to fill in the blanks individually. All right? It gives you these fields. But more importantly than anything else is this thing, the part number. I can't tell you what a nightmare it is. You'd think it'd be simple enough to just take a random number, increment it, and then issue it to some component. And yet when you've got a lot of people involved in this, it becomes a big issue. The last place I worked at, as I was mentioning before, we had to go to purchasing, tell them, give us a big block of numbers, reserve them in your system. Then we had to take them and say, well, how are we going to manage this? We ultimately put it in an Excel sheet, and then people would have to go in there. They would assign their name to one of them, and then they would have to save off the file. All right, and it kind of worked, but there's sometimes you get duplications, and other times people would declare one, they would go off on something for a week or so, they'd come back, they would declare another one. So, well, what happened to this last part number? Oh, well, I issued another part number for it, right? So it kind of got wasted. I mean, it's not that these are expensive. I mean, these numbers can go on quite a bit of time. But the point I'm trying to make over here is that it just became kind of a jumble, and it became very difficult to manage. With a system like this, it just issues the part number. It knows what the next part number is in the list. And when you fill this all out, it basically locks it all on in. So it's a great user interface that people can use. But there's also a backdoor to this as well. So if you've got a huge group of parts, and that's kind of the power of the database, is that you can throw a lot of parts in it all at once. There's also a backdoor. So this is built on a MySQL server. Okay? So if you need to, you can go in there and you can add whatever else you want in here. And it's just basically the same way you'd work Access, but it's a lot stronger, a lot more capabilities to it. And that's what's included in this particular box. And then, of course, the last thing is that, of course, you can see these parts. So if I go over here to my projects, I'm going to bring up this particular example over here. If I go to my libraries, all right, I'll lock this down. My libraries are over here, and let's just do this one here so you can see it. These are all of those things that are coming off of my QNAP box over here. So all these components are available. So what are you getting with this? Why would you bother with this? Because number one, sometimes you've got process things that you got to deal with. All right, and there's things that you just can't do when you're dealing with an access sheet. It just happens to be a part of the design process things you've got to work through. The second thing is that what we're providing to you is at least a couple hundred components of what I call experience built and vetted out. These are all parts that have been used in someone's designs at one point or another. Okay, so we don't have the designs in there, but we've got the component information in there, and that's the most important thing because a lot of times we're looking for good components. But lastly, and this is the most important part to think about, as I mentioned at the very beginning last week, when you're building something of this nature for a larger organization, you want to build it right the first time. Okay? It's like building that dam, and once that dam is built and the water's pushing against it, it's really hard to make repairs to that type of thing. As I mentioned, it took me 6 months to get one up and running, and most of that time was spent in meetings, all right, and emails. There was an amazing number of emails that went back and forth on certain topics and certain things. We had to write up documentation for it and so on and so forth. As I also mentioned, this database I'm showing you here right now, if you were to take all the time, the 3 years that was put into it to develop this thing, it could probably show well over 6 months of man time to develop it. So as a result, we make this thing available if you wish to purchase it. I'd like to go into more detail about it right now, but I can't just because I want to show you the other libraries. But I wanted to just kind of put that thought in the back of your head that if you're trying to get a database going, we've got something that will get you kick-started over here. And on April 17th, we'll do a very specific demonstration of the 9-box connects, as we were calling it right now, and you can see for yourself what it's all about. If you do contact us about it in the meantime, then we will also see what we can provide to you as soon as possible. That's what I want to say about that over here. There's one other type of database that I want to talk about before we get into the DB links. I mentioned it earlier, and it is the SVN database library, and it's very similar to what you see over here. All right, it's very similar to doing this here. It's just that instead of actually having the components in the directory in some library here. You literally break up all the components and you put them into a repository, okay? But it still works, and it works the exact same way. So as a matter of fact, if I click over here, I did create one, so there's an example that you can play with. Here's one that basically I took this library. Altium has a really good wizard for this. If you want to go this route, I don't really recommend it, but if you want to go this route, you can go here. Altium will break up all the libraries for you. They'll put them in the subversion database, and then they'll actually create the .mdb file for you, and it will also create the linker file. And I'll talk about this link file here in just a moment, because this is what gets Altium to talk to your databases. But it also allows me to segue into the DB-lib, to the DB-link file. All right, so there it is right over here. And by the way, since I've got this up, one of the cool features of any type of database, whether you use ours, Access, Excel, any type of database that's out there, is that you can do this thing called a cascading effect. So you can click over here and you can bring this up and you can start cascading things. Now in this case I only have a couple of them here. I should probably bring up the, let's bring up this other one. Let's take capacitors, for example. So this is on our DNAP server, okay? And let's go over here. So you can see value, manufacturer. If I want, I can put the footprint. Set description is not found. A little bit grumpy today. But I can push these things in over here. All right, let's go over here. I'll show it on my example. So let's go to my local one. Altium's going to get a little fussy. I knew some point it was going to do that to me. But nevertheless, the idea is that you can cascade these things over here, and as a result, it makes it really easy to search. And that's one of the powerful capabilities of the database library. And again, it goes back to this idea over here that the more information that you have, then you can do these kind of cascading searches, and it makes it easy to find the part that you're looking for. In a situation like this, do you really need it? Probably not. You got 10,000 parts, really useful to do. So just kind of keep that kind of thing in mind. The other thing that I'm going to do over here is I want to show you a very important file, and this is what they call the .dblib file, and this is the link file. Okay? And this file is used by Altium to know where to look for your database. And Altium already knows about looking for things like Access or Excel. So if you just click on this, it's fine. And in my case, I put these things in Access to kind of keep it simple here. But there's also this connection string. So if you have a database like the MySQL one, or you have something that's using the ODBC type of drivers, then you would build this. Okay? You install the ODBC drivers into your system, and then you can build this to get those drivers to work and interface with your library, with your database systems. Okay? This down over here is just telling you, hey, look, here's the field names that we've got in our database. This is good if it's being all filled out. These are the design parameters that are going to be dumped into the component when we take it out of the database. All right, and then they also have a table browser, which to me is just a really nice sanity check as to whether or not it can even see this. Now, by the way, in Excel or I think in Access, you can make changes to this, save it, and it'll get pushed back to the MDB. Not a big fan of that, but it allows you to do that kind of thing if you want to do that. So just to let you know that you can do it. I'll talk more about this in a moment over here because that has to do with what's called the DB link file. All right. So that's just kind of an overview of the database stuff. Again, I wish I could go into a lot more detail. It's just that my time is rather limited. But let me get over here into, let me bring this up over here because this is the DB link file here. All right. The DB link file looks just like the database link file. So what's the difference? The difference is this cannot be used as a library. You cannot link this up into your libraries over here. It will cause you some issues. All right. But the point of this thing is this, is that if you have data in another system and you want to link it to your components that are already in your design, you can do that through the DB link. So if you have access to your PLM system and the PLM system has nothing more than the purchaser's data, and that's all you want to put in there anyways for the bill of material, that's great. Now, this all remains the same, but this now becomes rather important because you need to tell Altium in this particular instance, how do you relate the databases to each other? You've shown Altium, hey, here's the database. Now, how do I take that information and correlate it to my component? And that's why it's really important to have a unique ID. And these unique IDs have to match up with each other. So going back to that comment I made about the company part number, you're like, why is he fussing over that? The reason I'm fussing over that is because that part number has to not only exist in your database library, it's got to ultimately exist in the PLM, and that's how they're going to match up with each other later on. Okay? So in my case here, my thing is called the co-part number, and when I say thing, I'm talking about my key field, the co-part number. My library parameter over here is the company part number, which we saw earlier in my particular database. So I told it these need to correlate with each other. And if you find that they're correlating, then take your information off of your database here, and we can do some stuff. We can add it in, or if I don't want it, I can basically say only add it if it's blank, or don't add it in. Okay, the default is that I think just add it in as necessary. So we've got these things over here that we can add in. We don't have to add them in if we don't want them. We can tell it to put into very specific design parameters if we've got ones already out there so that it will supersede the old information. So we have a lot of control over this as we're pulling this stuff in. And once you push that into your components, it's really slick because now that information is there for your bill of materials. You push your bill of materials out to your purchasers, and you're using their data to give them a decent bill of materials. So very, very powerful way of doing things. So it's the DB link file, all right? And just to demonstrate this here really quick, these components all came from the database. So I took an example of each and every single one of them, and I put them out there. Now, little known issue, I spent 2.5 hours on this with Altium, so just want to let you know about it. If they're pointing to a database file, the DB link, it's going to ignore this when I tell it to update it because it's going to try to update from its own database. So you've got to tell Altium, don't look at your own database, look at the data I'm providing you now through my DB link file. And the way you do that is you go into the Tools Parameter Manager, okay, and it's going to find, again, all my components for this project. And what I had to do is take the library name here and change it from whatever DB lib that I had over here. The DB basically was the DTO5 database. And I just changed it over here. I pushed the ECO over, so now these will point to my DB link. So that's the kind of the workaround that I had for that. With that in mind, the way I execute this is I go to Tools, Update Parameters from the database. Okay, so it's going to go through and it's going to say, okay, this is what I'm going to try to update. I recommend you create a log because not everything is going to be found, and it's going to tell you that. And it's just nice to know what didn't get found. So in my case here, there were 7 parts that weren't found, and I'll just give you a hint right now just to save some time. One of them was that custom part that I mentioned earlier on. It was for something that Altium built in-house. The other 6 of them were resistors because my database library that I linked this to over here came from DigiKey. I don't know if you guys know this or not, but one of the cool features of DigiKey, and I think Mauser does the exact same thing, you can give them a list. And what I did is I took my company part numbers, I took the manufacturer's name, I took the manufacturer's number, which I got from all the supplier links earlier on. I copied that out into an Excel sheet. I uploaded it into DigiKey. DigiKey did its stuff on it to tell me what the statuses were for each one of those parts. And then I told it to download an Excel sheet with me with all the additional information. I took that Excel information, I turned it into an Access database, and that's what this is pointing to right now. Okay? And interestingly enough, these parts that I found were from Mauser, and DigiKey didn't happen to sell them, which I think was unusual, but that's why 7 of these parts, 6 of which are resistors that DigiKey doesn't sell. So when I click on this, it kind of brings up the parameter manager type view again, and these are all the things it's going to add. So I'll accept the changes, I'll execute the changes, and all this information is now being added in to all my components. So as a result, now if whether this is my PLM or something I created over here, I've got all this intelligent data over here, go to my bill of materials, and now I can pick and choose as I need to do. Okay? And again, as I mentioned earlier as well, if you don't have a PLM, supplier link still works. Right there it is, the supplier search here. You can search on it, and you can add the stuff in to each and every single one of those parts. It still works. At the end of the day, you want to get the intelligent data there to get yourself to a bill of materials. Now, with my time that I have left, let me talk about the component library and the vault. And you probably have seen this before. If you've gone to a file new and you went into this thing called library, component library, what is this thing all about? What is it used for? Well, it actually was built specifically to help along with the vault. Okay, let me bring up the vault over here. I've got that buried on my other screen. And let me see if I can find it so I can bring it up. Maybe I don't. There it is. I don't have it up. So now I'll bring it up. So I do have a vault associated with this here. And I'm going to bring this one up. And the reason I'm going to bring this up here, so you can see all the, this is Altium stuff. I want my stuff. So let's go over to my vault, which doesn't seem to be live and kicking right now. Give me a moment here. Can I do this? Yeah. Open here. I'm going to make sure I can get to my vault here real quick, because if I can't see my vault, this is going to be a short conversation. Let's go over here to management, and let's go to vault here. You're not seeing my vault, so let's go find my vault. Not sure why I decided not to find it today, and if not, we'll just do local host. I think it's 780. Let's try that. And I apologize for the technical, and it found it. Great. So I think we're back up and running here. I'm not sure why it lost its link, but nevertheless, you should be able to find it now. So if I go back over here to my vaults, all right, here it is. Let's bring up my particular drive. So this is what I call my drive over here. You can give it whatever name you so desire. And again, I'm sorry about that. I don't know why I lost link to that, but thanks for bearing with me on that. So let's go over here. So here's an example of different things, and you can set this up as you see fit. So I do have different directories, for example, for capacitors, inductors, resistors. I also have these over here for these other ICs as well. So however you want to set this up. But the point I'm trying to make here is that, I mentioned earlier, if you're going to use a Subversion database library, you may want to think this level out, because the Subversion database library basically gives you control over the symbol, and it gives you control over the footprint, but it doesn't really give you any control over the component itself. In the vault, everything is under version control. So if I look at this part over here and I ask for its preview, you're going to see that all of these aspects of here which make this up are all under version control. The symbol's under version control, PCB's under version control, and the part itself is under version control. Okay, that's fine and dandy. You're probably asking yourself, what does this have to do with the .cmp lib? Well, you don't work in the vault. Okay, you can pull things from the vault. You can right-click and place them. If I had a schematic up, you'd have this visible here. You can place things in here, but you don't work in the vault. I can't make edits to this stuff. I can't change the linkages. Where I do all of that is in this thing that's called a comp lib over here. So the comp lib here is basically kind of a setup. I call it like a staging area. And in fact, you really can't even use this thing beyond its purposes of uploading things to the vault. You can't use it in the libraries, for example. But what you do over here is you basically tell it, hey, this is where my vault is. These are the required static parameters. These are very static. You can't change these. So these are kind of things that you expect they'll be the same all the way to the end of that part. You also tell it the type of models that you want to use. 99% of the time it's going to be both a PCB and a schematic. You can add in your SPICE and coming soon the signal integrity ones. But once you've told it that you can look at these required models, then you tell it to go find these things in the vault. So before you can even get to this over here, you must upload your footprint and your symbols to the vault. And it's not that hard to do. As a matter of fact, if I jump over to this one, for example, I could push these up as is. I won't do it just because I'm kind of pressed for time. But I just simply need to do two things. I need to link this library to the vault, say, hey, vault, this library is going to push stuff up to you. And then when I'm ready, I click on this. There's kind of a wizard it goes through, and it pushes those things up. The exact same thing for the footprint. So they make them available for the component library. Once they're available for the component library, then I can press add over here. It'll call up the vault saying, all right, take something from the vault that you want to have. All right, it keeps bringing me to the content vault here. Let's go to mine. So if I have my models, for example, and I do have some models here, for example, I could say, okay, let's retrieve whichever one of these models I want to use over here. And that's, again, why it's really important that you set this up in such a way so that you can see what type of models that you have available to yourself here. And here you can see a good example. This originally came from a 3-day ABS training that Altium provided. I was allowed to be one of the pilot students in it. And it was really a great opportunity to see this stuff. But you can see what happens when you don't really give a very good description on some of this stuff. It just becomes kind of an eyesore when, in fact, you really need to have this organized so you can find the symbol for that. So, again, it goes back to good descriptions, good library names, and so on and so forth. Nevertheless, once you add those things in here, they become available for each one of the components you create down here. So if I want to create a component here, it's just a matter of me saying add component. It doesn't really matter about the name here, but now I can pick which one of these I want to use, all right? And I can pick which symbol I want to use. It will always default to the one that's up here for the group. And then I just add my additional information over here as to my comment, my description, my part number, and so on and so forth. And then I just basically tell Altium, hey, go ahead and push this back up to the vault, and then it goes there. Now, that's cool, but there's kind of something really interesting about this. What's interesting about the vault when it comes to the components is that it's actually manufacturer agnostic. That's the best way for me to describe that. Because if you look at everything I'm telling you over here, granted, these parts would be built based off of some component you have in mind, but you don't put the manufacturer's information in the component itself. it becomes a link to the component. And this is one of the most powerful features of the Vault. And there's many powerful features of it. I usually spend an hour and a half talking to customers about the Vault when they ask for demonstrations of it. So I'm glossing over a lot of this stuff. But the key feature I want you to see, because it goes back to the whole intelligent data thing, is this whole link thing. And what do I mean by that? So I'm going to just take this part over here, and I'm going to go over to its supplier chain, okay? Because all these were set up with this. And what's neat about this is that, again, it's similar to what we've seen in the past, but this information that you see over here is based off the manufacturer's information. Well, how do I do that? Well, click on this little button. I think this should be a nicer button, but this is what we do. We're familiar with this. We've seen this several times in this demonstration. But what's neat about this is that as you look around for stuff, when you find what you're looking for, you don't do it based on the supplier. You do it based on a manufacturer's part number, okay? So if I find something here that I like, or maybe there's 3 different flavors of it, maybe the manufacturer has one for tape and rail, another one for loose parts, hey, put those all on in there. Because once I push this over here, okay, which just represents nothing more than the part number, and I cancel this out, look at all these other things that I'm getting as a result of that, okay? Because sometimes it's the manufacturer who provides the different numbers based off of tape and reel, or if they give loose parts. Other times it's based off the supplier who may be doing that for you. So look at all the options I get as a result of that, just by one manufacturer's part number. But more importantly, this is a link, not data. Data is something that gets captured in as parameters, and the problem with that in all the libraries and even the supplier thing in what I've shown you up to this point, it's all great if you're doing a bill of materials in the next 2 weeks. But after that, that data is going to go stale. With the Vault, we're dealing with links. So everything you see here is not being stored in the Vault. Everything you're seeing here is being brought to you real time based off Altium, going out to the internet and pulling up this information. So it allows you to make a good decision. So if you want to use that part, you right-click and you place it, and now it's going to be on your design. Now, let's take this one step further as to the importance of this. I'm going to do File, and I'm going to do Open. I need to open this up afterwards, because sometimes it does lose its link. It's just a known issue in Altium. But nevertheless, I'm going to bring this on up. Let's go to Tour of Libraries, and I'm going to go into this example Vault. I wish I could give you all my Vault information. I have no way of doing it. In fact, after I took the training class, I literally had to rebuild everything going step by step through the example in order to get it back into my Vault. But I will give you these things so you can at least play with it. I just don't know if the links will work for it at this time. Let's try it. I'm going to bring this one up. I'll press Open. Okay, and let me bring up this one because it's got a lot of great examples in it. Because of those links, what happens when I put my cursor over it, because these came from the Vault, every time I put my cursor over it, I get all this really great information. Here's the kicker. I double-click into this. None of that data is being captured here, which is a great thing because, again, that becomes stale. And I don't want to have a project 6 months from now where I'm trying to clean up that mess that I've made 6 months earlier, right? As I said, it works great for the moment. But you got to think ahead if you're ever going to make a change to this. Parts go obsolete. Parts numbers change. Companies drop stuff, right? You know how that whole thing works. So what's nice about that link is that I just put my cursor over at Altium, says, oh, you got this part? Well, based on the links I got, this is what you're going to get at any given time. And then lastly, and this is it's a new feature, I think it's a very powerful one, is this thing called the BOM doc. So it's File, New, and then you put BOM doc in here. And yes, you can use this for any other library type. But since all these things already have their links set up, this stuff is already going to be set to go because it's going to give you all the options based off of those links that you had in the Vault. And it's really a great way to set up. You can set up your own target prices here, and then it'll give you the actual price based off of what you selected in here. And Altium will also tell you the supply risk as well. So here's an example of a part that I picked. It doesn't have enough stock. Well, let me go see if I got another part over here. Well, here's one. So, I'll set the rank as being the highest now. Oops. Jumped off of it. Let's try that again. I'll set the rank as being the highest. And now it's clear because I found the part. There may not be enough stock as we saw earlier on, or the price target's missed, so I can change this saying, well, shoot, if it's 540, then it's 540. So I'll make it 540 here, and I'll change this out. Actually, it gets a little stubborn. It wants something 1 dime penny higher. But nevertheless, it changes this here. So by the time you're providing a bill of materials to your purchasers, you got something that's real, and it's not just being thrown over the wall in the hopes that it's going to be real. This is very real. You've done the homework, and that's because the Vault had the links to provide you for those parts. Last thing over here, whatever your target was is based off of what you put into these values here. Altium will give you the actual price based off of the production quantity, and Altium is good about saying, oh, well, if you got this many of them, then I'll reduce the price. If I got 1,000 of them, I refresh it. So currently it's at $26 per board or for these components based on a production of 100. Well, let's see what happens when we get to 1,000. All right, do we get a bigger bang for a buck? Yeah, we save $5 a board.